The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly is brought to you by Hims. Hims is changing healthcare by providing access to affordable and discreet sexual health treatments. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/blind. That's HIMS.com/blind for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/blind. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you to Rich Lesser, who's the global chair of Boston Consulting Group, where he engages with CEOs, boards of directors, and senior leaders around the world on critical topics including climate and sustainability, resilience, and purpose. He served as BCG's CEO from 2013 to 2021, a period of exceptional growth for the firm. During his tenure as CEO, Rich built new units to create BCG's digital business building, advanced analytics, and machine learning and AI capabilities, and launched the BCG Center for Climate and Sustainability. Rich also served as BCG's chairman for North and South America from 2009 to 2012, and as head of the New York Metro office system from 2000 to 2009. Before joining BCG in 1988, Rich worked in product development at Procter Gamble. Thanks for coming on the show, Rich.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Hey, Rich, I just want to know, what made you decide to go into management consulting?
So I worked at Procter Gamble as a chemical engineer making soap. Really felt soap was a bit narrow. And when I went to business school, I found what I really enjoyed most when I was at P&G was actually wandering the halls and talking to people about the different things they were working on, the problems they were facing. And I thought management consulting, which was a much smaller field back in those days than it is today, it still sounded very appealing to me. I also then really resonated with some of the things they were working on. At the time, BCG was working on time-based competition and believing that competing on time was as important to think about as things like cost and quality. And that was exactly my experience at P&G, where they had the best products, but were often way too slow in getting them to market back in those days. And so I really resonated with some of the things they were working on. So that was how I got there.
So is that a lot of what management consultant does? Like they have to figure out, hey, there's a problem, and they're going to need someone from the outside to come in and help fix it.
So I think it's really evolved, right? I've been at BCG now over 35 years. The industry has changed dramatically over that arc. I think in the early days of consulting, it was really bring us your hardest problems, often strategy type questions. You have smart people who have a good set of analytic tools and can bring a perspective. I think what clients realized back in those days is that simply getting the answer to hard questions wasn't sufficient. A huge focus in the 90s and early 00s was about how to be able to make really complicated change efforts happen. So it wasn't enough to solve the problem. You also have to solve the problem and make change really happen as a result. And then what I think companies realized after the great financial crisis was the world was speeding up. And it was no longer enough just to make change happen once. You had to build the capabilities to continue to learn and evolve as part of the work with clients. But in BCG parlance is enablement. So you have to obviously take on very tough problems and get to the right answer. You have to make change happen, but you have to build capabilities in the client so they can keep evolving and keep growing. And I'd say what we've seen over the last 5 to 8 years is in the early days of enablement, it was really human enablement, leadership, culture, organization design, things like that. What we see now is, yes, there's still a big human component to enablement. There's a massive technology component as well. It's building the tools and platform and data infrastructure so that companies cannot just build their human capacity to keep evolving, but they have the technical foundations to learn faster than their competitors, drive better changes, build deeper relationships, drive more productive infrastructures. Enablement really has both components, and that's now a very big part of our work.
I really appreciate this walkthrough, Rich, in terms of the focus on enablement, because I think within the tech industry, management consultants can sometimes get a bad rep in terms of, oh, well, that job must be easy, in terms of those are just the folks that come in, they give their recommendations, and they never have to actually implement, or they're not technologists and they're not in the quote unquote trenches. I think most people will be surprised to hear that BCG actually hires all of these subject matter experts, including technologists, including AI experts, to actually help their clients implement. Are there any other kind of myths about the industry or the profession that we can kind of bust right now?
The one that I always find most frustrating for us, and again, I've only been at one firm in this industry, so you always have to, say this is what I've seen in my own experiences. There's this sort of myth of consultants who take your watch and tell you what time it is. And I would have to say my experience at BCG has been exactly the opposite. If someone feels like they know the answer to their problem, we're way too expensive. And frankly, we're way too direct about our views to be the people that you would want to hire. We take a lot of pride and put a lot of emphasis on our training, the kind of people we hire, for just the opposite, which is obviously people that collaborate well, that listen carefully, that don't ignore the experiences and the learnings of our clients, but are there to bring a new perspective, an independent point of view, to ideally be able to get to an answer at the end of an effort that isn't what any of us knew at the start. It's not that BCG came in knowing the answer, but it's also not that our clients did either. And it's this sort of shared experience of discovery and learning and challenge, and bringing the lessons that our clients have experienced, but also analogs from other industries and other parts of the world that allow us to get to better answers than others have. And I think the second one, which you alluded to, is this idea that somehow it's just about getting to the answer. That is the starting point. I mean, putting a lot of effort into implementing the wrong thing creates very little value. So you do have to get it right, but getting it done, and getting it done in a way that it can evolve and grow, is as important as getting it right. And there's a huge amount of focus on how do you drive impact. And one of the changes I've observed in the client landscape, forget the consulting landscape, is clients more and more are hiring people that they believe actually can really drive to impact in their organizations. They realize that, particularly in a world where they're trying to build new technology and they're trying to do it at speed, often competing with native tech players in different spaces, that if they don't have people who can really help them drive to building stuff and getting it done and getting it used at scale in an organization. So that's not just a technical problem, that's an organization problem. How do you get people to adopt it and use it? If you don't have that skill, then you're really not getting the value you should expect from a management consulting partner.
Rich, for yourself, from a career perspective, how did it go from starting out to becoming, the CEO whisperer and doing all that? How do you navigate a career to have such a trajectory? Because that's pretty wild, right?
First,
and you don't have to be humble. You could just
no. Well, you can decide humble or not. This CEO whisperer thing, like, I was a very kind reporter who coined that years ago. Like, trust me, that's never been my self-reflection. I love engaging with teams to really make a meaningful impact with clients, and to really deeply believe that you're putting their interests above your interests. But if you drive a lot of value, if you make stuff happen, then you earn trust, and you have the chance to take on even bigger problems. I mean, it's rare that a client brings in a firm they don't know day one for their very most sensitive, most important problem. You tend to only give those kinds of topics to people that have earned your trust over time, not just earned your trust in being very high quality, but in the way they operate, in the way they treat and collaborate with people in your organization, and their commitment to doing the right thing. And so my career prior to being CEO, my 24 years, even though I had internal roles that you said at the beginning in terms of leading New York or leading North and South America, were first and foremost around serving my clients. I didn't turn to serve many clients, but I tended to serve them quite deeply and over multiple years. And And that's what I loved. I loved driving the impact, and I loved that I was constantly learning. I felt like I was on this incredibly steep learning curve because BCG tends to be some of those firms at the cutting edge as the business world is evolving. And I felt like whatever the issues were at the day, we were one of the first people in to try to figure out what it meant, whether it was large scale mergers and acquisitions or globalization or huge change efforts or the earliest waves of technology, even back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And so I love that. And I think over time, my colleagues saw that I loved it too. In a place like ours, which is a true partnership, you want people in leadership that are really excited about the work, which I always was, and people believe are committed to the success of those around them at least as much as their own success. I mean, a partnership spirit in a deep sense, and I think that came across. And so I ended up taking on these other roles. And then as CEO, interestingly, I found myself transitioning. Up until becoming CEO, I was tended to be focused on relatively few clients that I was very deeply involved in. All of a sudden, as CEO, you're traveling the world. I would visit 50 cities, 30 countries a year for up until just before COVID. And in those visits, now all of a sudden you're talking to, hundreds of clients a year. And in each one of them, you're trying, of course, you have things that you want to share with them, but mostly you're trying to listen really carefully to them and think about what you know from what you've seen in other parts of the world that can be meaningful to them and helpful. That was a new skill to learn, and I really enjoyed it because I was in this constant learning mode all around the world and a chance to give back, not just in one client very deeply, but in many senior leaders in smaller snippets, but often meaningful ways.
It seems like it's very additive. The way you're describing your career, you're interacting with really smart, accomplished people. And the more people you interact with, the smarter you get and the more knowledge you get. And it kind of keeps growing. And then also, it seems that you bring a passion to what you do and excitement to what you do. And that seems to then spur on your career. Do you think that's good advice to give to people?
I agree with that. I think you have to have a passion.
Mm.
It's very hard, particularly in a career that spans many, many years. It's not a short-term thing. In my case, it's multiple decades. Like, to do that, you have to love what you're doing, and you have to genuinely love the people you're doing it with. I mean, I can't imagine a career where you didn't wake up in the morning. Not that every single person's going to be a great friend out of work. Relatively, I don't have that many BCG. Now I do, actually. It's so many years. But for a long time, I had a few very close friends at BCG that were friends out of work. But I didn't have tons. I wasn't constantly hanging out with huge numbers of people. But when I was at work, I genuinely liked working with them. I was committed to their success. I felt like many of them were committed to mine. And we're in it together, and we're trying to make a positive difference. I think you have to have that kind of energy and that sense of being a part of community if you're really going to give of yourself. And in the end, getting bigger roles in an organization, and ours, it's more a partnership culture, but even in a corporation, people want to feel like you're all in. You're in it for the team. You're in it to make a huge difference. And that you're committed to the people around you and love the business you're in.
Now, I'm curious. Recently, with like the student debt crisis, there's been a lot of focus from younger professionals or professionals to go to university and study something quote unquote practical like computer science that can earn some big bucks and pay off those student loans. What advice do you have for those folks that might find themselves in a profession where they chased compensation or they chased quote unquote prestige of a job profession and they don't have that, vigor or that passion or that excitement in their day to day? Can they still make their career work in the way that it can get accelerated in the way that yours did?
Well, so first I have to acknowledge I'm not so different than some of those students. I grew up in Pittsburgh in the 1970s. It was like a depression era. My father had lost his job in I think 19. When I went to Michigan, I went there first and foremost to believe I would have a good job at the other end. I didn't have a lot of money. I had some debt coming out of college. I was going to have to pay that off. So I became a chemical engineer because in those days, like chemical engineers, I was good at math and science and I loved chemistry, but I'm not really an engineer. I mean, my wife doesn't trust me to fix anything in our house, like nothing. But engineers got good jobs, and that was a big part of the motivator for me. Once I got into that world, I realized that while I did love hard problems and I did love science and math, my heart wasn't as an engineer. Like, it didn't fit. It was, in theory, it could have fit for me. I probably could have been pretty good at it, but it just wasn't where my heart was. And so the decision to go back to business school was like, I have skills that I think are pretty good, but I think I'm applying them in a place that doesn't give me passion, even though P&G as a company is a terrific company. I think that's part of what drew me to business school. And what I would say, particularly for people very early on in life, but I've watched people in mid-career do it too. I think there is a chance, you go to college to build a set of skills. Hopefully you get some really good life and work experiences in the years out of college, but it's not a destiny that means you're stuck forever. I think the 20s in particular is a time for exploring and building your own skills and figuring out what gives you passion and what sort of environments you really can thrive in. And then figuring out how to get to those. For some people, like for me, and also for my wife, who went from banking to media. I mean, she went to business school for the same different career path, but the same goal, which was she realized she didn't have passion in the banking world and she'd always wanted to do something in the media environment. So she used business school as a transition moment for her. She took a huge pay cut to do it. I mean, they paid a lot more in banking than in the media world, but I think for her as well, build skills. She learned a ton. She was doing systems work in banking. She grew enormously doing that kind of work, but it wasn't where her heart was. And so I think it's about both. I think it's about building skills and learning, but it's also describing what gives you energy and figuring out how to direct yourself to that. Sometimes it's about more schools. Sometimes it's taking a bit of a risk. Sometimes it's just taking a jump. I would encourage people in their 20s to think about both elements really, really carefully.
It's also having courage, right? To say, I could be at P&G, be very happy, make a nice living, but if I'm not loving it, I got to have the courage of my convictions to say, I have to move on, even if it's scary, even if I'm afraid, even if I'm worried, right? To push yourself to do what you really, because we all kind of feel inside like we know what we want to do. And we're just sometimes too scared to do it. But you have to take, and do you think that's kind of the separation between people who get really super successful and those who don't? Because they know what they want and they just go after, as opposed to playing it safe and just doing the average stuff.
I think it's true for both people and for companies. Mm-hmm. Just to this point, so when Christoph Schweitzer, my successor, became CEO, he's a wonderful guy. And I gave him a poster. I had a framed poster that was actually hanging on my mom's classroom. My mom taught 8th graders, and every year she wasn't very tall, and she'd bring me in. I'm not so tall either, but I was taller than her. And she'd bring me in, and I would be the one who would put up the posters in her classroom, like when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, things like that. But the one that I gave Christoph, I don't know where the quote is from, but it says, ships in a harbor are safe, but that's not what ships are built for. And I always love that, because I think for people and company, it's a wonderful saying, and it's been with me my whole life. I saw it every year, putting it up on the wall, but then it sort of stuck with me, not just with my mom's students. And I always felt like it's true for people and it's true for companies, that you get good at something and you think, let's just stay close to home and let's just do that. But we're not just built to do what we're necessarily doing today. And certainly for companies right now, in a world of so much change, I think it's one thing to be clear about what your purpose is. It's another thing to think that what you do today is what you continue to do. We all have to keep changing and growing. So I do think that's very applicable for people.
This episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly is brought to you by BetterHelp. For anyone out there who needs to hear this, you are more than your job. Don't get us wrong. Passion for your work is great, but it's so important to find joy, fulfillment, and validation in your life as a whole, not just at work. And therapy can help you get there. We all go through ups and downs in our career. Maybe you're thinking about switching career paths, or you're feeling super burned out in your job. You might be struggling with the uncertainty of our current economy or trying to manage the anxiety that can come up during the job interview process. Whatever it is, you're not alone and therapy can help. Therapy gives you a place to talk through what's going on at work in a safe and supportive environment, figure out what goals you have for your life and career, and build the confidence to go out and make them happen. Otherwise, it's easy to stick at the same old, even if it's not making you happy. If you're interested in giving therapy a try, BetterHelp offers affordable online therapy on a flexible week-to-week schedule so you can fit it into your day. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get started, then BetterHelp will match you with a licensed therapist based on your needs, preferences, and goals. Connect with your therapist by text, phone, or video call. Start the process in minutes and switch therapists anytime. Elevate your work and your life with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/teamblind for 20% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/TEAMBLIND for 20% off your first month.
Rich, I don't know if this is fair to ask, but I would imagine your mom was probably a pivotal piece in terms of your growth, because having that up on the wall, that says something a lot about her and how she views the world, and it probably went down to you as well. What was your mom, your dad, were they like very positive people, very
Yes,
motivated?
and in very complimentary ways. The irony of this, my mom was a middle school teacher, and my dad was an accountant who then was a CFO of different companies, and then at age 59 switched to public service. He worked with the community of governments in northwestern Pennsylvania until he was 79, trying to bring communities to get them to work together. It's interesting. I think I learned a lot of my consulting skills from my dad, because he was constantly a problem solver by nature. You couldn't, whether it was in business or when he did, work with local community governments, he was always trying to figure out what's really going on, what's a different way to think about it, how do you get people to work together to solve the problem. My mom, though, teaching middle schoolers, which is not the easiest thing, 7th and 8th graders, and hearing her stories year after year about, how do you get kids to do this? I mean, how do you create the right environment where everybody can thrive and learn? How do you think about discipline in a way that isn't just, a teacher up there shouting at the students? She never raised her voice. And I think hearing those stories over and over, actually for leadership, for the roles I took on, particularly in a partnership culture, where it's not a culture of, a corporate boss sort of command and control. We're a team and we're trying to get better together. I actually thought a lot of my leadership lessons, including the poster on the wall that I mentioned, I think sitting around a kitchen table every night, listening to stories about being in a classroom all day, I think really had a very meaningful impact for me. I thought a lot about how much sort of her experiences and her approach to working with young people really helped me throughout my career within BCG.
As you think about it, that's what you're doing with your career, taking her advice that she would give to you, and now you're sharing it with the clients and your coworkers.
I think it had a big impact for me on how also just the kind of human being. Like, she was so focused on how you respect each individual. And I never felt like she was using the power. It's obviously a power imbalance when you're the teacher and you have students. And many teachers, either because they don't have other skills or because they're just oriented that way, really are trying to use that power imbalance in very aggressive ways to get people to do what they want to do. I watched her never think about the power imbalance. So it was like, how do I motivate students to want to do that? How do I get them excited? She was an English teacher, about wanting to read Sherlock Holmes or wanting to write. How do I help them follow their passions? Some want to read different kinds of books or focus on poetry, not novels or whatever. She felt like her intent was not to tell people what to do, but unlock what would get them excited, but also to create some ground rules about how people would treat each other, how the classroom would operate. And I think in many ways, that sort of spirit is very deep inside me now in ways I don't even realize now, to be honest.
Do you have any advice for folks that are trying to find that spirit in terms of unlocking their interest or passions in terms of their professional careers? Maybe they've been doing the same thing for a few years and they're just trying to think, maybe is this all that's going to be it for me in my career? Do you have any advice for folks that are trying to find that catalyst, that spark, that next level in their career?
Well, first, I think sometimes People don't take the time when they are enthusiastic. They get so caught up in the day-to-day, what I need to deliver from my job or other things, that they don't use these moments to follow things that really do get them excited and to explore it. And one of the wonderful parts about today's world, there is literally nothing you can have a passion for that you can't explore in a variety of ways, just online, whether it's the podcast you do. There's so many different ways to get information, to consume, to connect with others. I think that too many young people get caught up in the very narrowness of what they feel like they need to do in the short term, and they don't use the opportunities that come to explore a bit more broadly. By the way, that's not just true for young people. I think that's a lifelong thing. I think that is as important now that I'm in my 60s as it being in my 60s as it is in my 20s. Willingness to have a spark of curiosity, to see something you didn't expect to see and go a little bit deeper, to have a conversation with someone that isn't the person you talk to every day, but maybe has an idea or seems to have an interest that is something you've always had a desire to learn more about. I think that quest of learning is part of what keeps us young, but I think it's also part of what gives life energy and passion and meaning. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing that you mentioned earlier, I do think it's not every week or even every year, but there are moments in life it does take some courage to take a chance to do something different and to try something new. And obviously, if you can de-risk it, obviously, if you can have a fallback plan, I'm not saying I'm not an enormous risk taker by nature. I'm not parachuting out of planes or doing crazy multi-100-foot scuba dives or things that I know some people do. But I do think there are times in life when, even in a thoughtful way, to try something a bit different, ask for an assignment that you won't be great at day one, but you do it with a supportive supervisor. So you try something that's hard for you to do, but with a person that you think you can trust, that will want you to succeed, that will coach you, that will give you honest feedback. Things like that can feel hard rather than doing the same set of skills you're really good at and just keep doing that. I do believe it's important, particularly if you think about the arc of a career, not just, being happy in this particular year.
So, Rich, once you hit a certain age, do you feel also as the chairperson now that it changes, that you become that elder statesman? Is that kind of a progression that you think of or look at?
The difference is what you think of yourself, and then when you step back of how others look at you. Like, I sit with people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s all day long. That's the vast majority of people I work with. BCG's a pretty young place. I just feel like one of them. We're rolling up our sleeves to solve a problem or figure out how to engage with a client, or we're building a new capability and we're kicking around ideas. But then every once in a while, you realize, like, how are they looking at you? And then I think how I looked at people of my age now, when I was in my 30s, it seemed like ancient, right? So I think that for me, at least, part of the challenge and part of what I hope I come across, I don't know if I always do, is that, we're just in this together. It's not like I know there's a hierarchy thing, though frankly, global chair is a wonderful title, but it's not like I'm anybody's boss anymore. I'm the CEO role in the way BCG is structured more than being the global chair. But I know from their perception, there's still this imbalance. I don't think you do as good work together with people when one side perceives this big imbalance. And I do my best to try to create a spirit of, we're just a team, we're working through something together. I obviously bring some life perspectives or experiences that they don't have. I want to contribute those, but it's not like I go in with all the answers, particularly when we get to topics like AI or climate, where the issues are so massive and so complex and everybody's in a learning mode. I mean, they have to see that I realize that I'm in a learning mode at least as much as, any of them are. I just feel like you have to have a mindset. We do everything we can to get as far as we can, knowing that none of us control all the levers that are going to be required. And I try to impart that to both our teams, because, we have so many committed people who join BCG precisely because they want to have impact. And I feel like I'm constantly trying to help them understand we can't do everything. We're one firm. We're going to do everything we can do to make a difference. And we're going to make the world a better place. Whether we'll make it better enough, probably not. But you just push where you can. And I try to share the same with clients. so that they sort of want to keep the ambition, stay the course, even when, they feel sometimes what's being said publicly is unrealistic.
I appreciate your wisdom here in terms of, how eloquent you are in terms of breaking down these complex subjects. I imagine you have to do this quite often every day as a management consultant, speaking with CEOs, boards of directors, chairmen, politicians, even industry leaders. Do you have any advice for the professional who might be a bit more timid in terms of speaking with even their own executives or even their own managers? How do you build that gravitas when you're speaking with, let's be honest, like influence makers?
I think there are two skills in this. Of course, the first skill is to get very sharp in what it is you're trying to communicate. Think through the arguments carefully. Think through, why are there other ways to look at it? And why do you look at it the way you look at it? Obviously, marshal the facts, the analysis, the information you've gathered, and really spend some time and how do you communicate it as simply and clearly as possible? Figure out what elements to what you're trying to say are central and which are sort of nice to have, and have the nice to haves if someone has a question, but maybe focus the core of what you're going to communicate on just the core arguments you need to get across. That's a set of skills none of us, well, maybe a few people have it out of college, but I certainly didn't. You sort of develop that over many, many years. I think the second one, which is actually one of the things I think management consulting probably helps more than many other kinds of roles, is to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Even you can communicate all the things I just said, but if you're not in the shoes of the person who's the recipient of that, of the person who's going to hear this, and knowing where they're coming from and why they believe what they believe, or why they have chosen not to take the actions you think they should take for years, I think it's very important, because even a very well-delivered argument that meets all the characteristics I describe, that is not responsive to where the listener is coming from and why they see the world the way they do, it doesn't mean you give up what you believe in. It doesn't mean you just tell them what they want to hear. Actually, quite the opposite. The goal is to tell them what you think they should hear, but in a way that they can listen and hear it and digest it and internalize it, and hopefully even be ready to act on it. And that's a higher level skill. Again, not something I think most young people coming out of college have. It's sort of a skill that you develop over time, but it's a distinct skill from making your arguments really well and cogently. It's putting yourself in the other person's shoes in a very deep way. And consultants, because they have no direct power, because we don't get to tell anybody what to do in our clients, we're only there to offer our point of view and offer our support to make things happen. I think you learn over the course of a career that if you're not able to do that, you can have invested all this work, put so much effort into getting to the right answer, but if you don't share it in a way that's meaningful and understandable and internalizable by the client, then nothing may happen at the end. And I will tell you personally, the most frustrating feeling is to feel like you've done great work, feel like you have the right answer, and cannot get a client to act on it. Like that feeling to me, like it doesn't matter how much you got paid. It doesn't matter. It just like you've invested your heart and soul to take on the super hard thing, and now you can't get action done. So I think you realize early on, if I'm not putting myself in that person's shoes and seeing the work from their angles, then the odds of it being successful are much lower. I think you can make such a bigger difference if you can have that skill. I believe each of us should look to be able to make a contribution beyond sort of just the business world, whether it's in the social sector or an NGO, in government, in the public sector. I do strongly believe that we all need to figure out how we're going to give back to the world, particularly when you've been as privileged to have a long career in the business world like I've had, and a successful one. So to do that and stay true to who you are as a human being, that is not a small skill.
That's it for The Blind Ambition. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.